Hello, I'm James from RPS. I'm here with video producer Liam behind the camera.
Hello.
Hello, Liam. And we are going to be looking at how to build a PC. Now, should you build your own PC? I think the answer to that is yes, because you'll be saving probably about 200 quid-ish compared to just buying one pre-built. It's also, I think, quite fun and enjoyable, and it's actually quite hard to get wrong. A lot of people don't think this because there's obviously a lot of scary-looking electrical equipment with exposed copper bits and circuitry. So, to build your PC, you will need a PC case, a CPU processor, a motherboard, RAM, graphics card, storage. I think you can just get away with a good SSD, but if you want, you can also add a larger mechanical hard drive like that. Some form of CPU cooler. We've got both an all-in-one water cooler and an air cooler here. A power supply, thermal paste, big screwdriver, little screwdriver, and optionally, but I think very recommended, some cable ties. And that's pretty much it. So let's get started. So, first thing we're going to do is install the CPU. Now you will have noticed through the magic of editing that I now have a mostly blank table except for the CPU and the motherboard. So yeah, we have the CPU, we're going to put it into the motherboard, and then later on we're going to put the motherboard into the case, once we've done more stuff to the motherboard. So we are doing an Intel-based build for this, which means we have a kind of lifting locking system. You kind of have a similar thing on AMD ones, except you don't have the little, what would you call this? The bed sheet.
Yeah, the bed sheet for the CPU's bed.
We're gonna put the CPU to bed. Literally, just plop it down, face up, like that, till it's nestled nice and secure. There are little tabs and notches around the edges of the CPU, so you know exactly where it goes in. Like I say, very hard to get wrong. So that just the bed linen to the hook like that, making it nice and secure. And that is how you install the CPU. So now that we have the CPU in the CPU socket, we need to find a way to cool it, because otherwise it will overheat in a few seconds and your PC will not run, and that would be terrible for everyone. Assuming you don't want to use some kind of like extremely expensive open loop liquid cooling, which I don't recommend for your first build, you basically have a choice of two different types of cooler. You have the air cooler, which is very cheap normally, very simple, very reliable, or you have an all-in-one water cooler. These are typically a lot more expensive. They're a bit trickier to install, but they do have much better cooling performance, which is good if you're overclocking or just if you've bought Intel 12th Gen i9. We're not doing any overclocking today, so let's just start with the air cooler, I think. Now, all coolers are different. Not every single one will have the exact same mounting system, but they're all kind of broadly similar. They'll all normally use a backplate like this. It has some little screws poking through, there's 4 of them, and these will correspond to the 4 holes on the motherboard. So if we turn the motherboard over, this should, the 4 screws should line up. Yep, that's nice and flat. And then keeping it nice and flat, back down on the table. That's fine. So next up we have 4 of these standoffs, which are going to go over the screws poking through the holes on the motherboard. This is probably easier if you don't have fingers and thumbs that are the exact same size and shape as my own head. Right, those 4 are now on, and then next up we have these risers? Is that what you call them? I don't know. Okay.
Spacers?
Spacers? Someone will tell us in the comments how stupid we are for not knowing the terminology. And then, on top of those, 4 fastening screws, which can just go on with your thumbs. I know there's a Phillips head cross cut into them.
But they're tight enough if you just use your hands.
But basically, yeah. Or I might actually give them a little tight with a screwdriver, just to make sure. Since I do have it with me, as I do at all times when I'm building computers.
Not just at all times. If you're in a Sainsbury's, you've always got a screwdriver on you.
Yeah, that's why I'm not allowed back in Lidl. So, God, why am I... There we go. Those 4 are in place. And the next thing to do is not attach the air cooler, because we have one more very important component, the thermal paste. Now,
this is the bit that terrifies me. I'm just going to say this. So I don't know whether people watching, if they've never built a computer before, the thought of thermal paste is horrific.
You might have seen like terrible pictures of people putting on like too much thermal paste and it all like oozing out the side and overheating your CPU. You do need a little bit because that's what transfers heat essentially, or facilitates the transfer of heat between the CPU and the cooler, which is how it all works. Now, a lot of coolers do come with pre-applied thermal paste. I guess you can just use that, like you can just stick it on. But I do think you should get a tube of thermal paste when you buy all your PC like building gubbins, even if it's not as girthy as this one, because every time you put it on and off, you will need to reapply the thermal paste. You can't like wrench off, leaving it all a little scraggly mess and then put it back on, because that could leave an uneven layer, which wouldn't be good. So yeah, fresh thermal paste. How much thermal paste though is the key issue. When I was building PCs in the late 2000s, people said like the size of a pea. But how big is a pea? People must be watching this saying like, just put the damn thing on. So I am going to, and you do have to eyeball a bit. But I think for a CPU of this size, about that is fine. So what would you call that? Like the amount of wasabi the average person would be willing to eat at one time. The way to spread it around the CPU, again, people used to say, get a piece of card or something, or a brush, and like spread it around evenly before you put the CPU on. Mm-hmm. I think you don't have to bother with that, because if you just plonk the cooler down on top of it, nice and even, that will perfectly evenly squidge it out over the whole CPU and get you a nice even layer. Right, now I have a confession to make, viewers. I did in fact mislead you earlier, because you saw a complete air cooler with the fan attached. But for this, we are going to have to disattach the fan and lay it down so that these screws fit into these holes. And in doing so, squidge out the thermal paste nice and evenly. I wonder, in hindsight, that might be like maybe a tiny fraction too much thermal paste, but it'll be fine. So those screws line up like that. And Liam, could you grab my screwdriver, please? I put it I put it so far out of shot I can no longer reach it. There we go. Doing it about 3/4 of the way tightened on either side, because we don't want to fully tighten it at one edge, because that might not evenly smush out the thermal paste.
Ah, I see. So we tighten them slowly and evenly.
Basically, yeah. God, this is physics, isn't it? We're learning physics as we build a computer on which we can play, I don't know, Fortnite.
I couldn't think of any other game other than Fortnite.
Fortnite, you will need to bleep that, Liam. So to reattach the fan on this specific model, which is a Cooler Master 212 Evo, I think, basically clip it on both sides like that. Perfectly durable. Notice we have the fan pointing towards what will eventually be the back of the PC, because we want all the hot air being blown towards the exhaust at the back. And then last thing to do is just take this loose cable and plug it into the CPU cooler header at the top of the motherboard, like so. If you're not sure which header to plug your CPU air cooler into, you can look up in your manual, there'll be a diagram of the motherboard with all the different headers labeled. You'll be looking for the one called CPU fan. It's also, as it is on this particular motherboard, the ports are sometimes labeled, so CPU fan is to the far left, so we know that the header on the far left of these four is the CPU fan header. Now it is time to turn our attention to the all-in-one water cooler. You'll notice this no longer has a fan on it, so that's because we're not actually attaching the fan to the radiator until we attach the radiator to the case, which we're not doing yet. But what we can do is take the back plate that came with the cooler, and similar to the air cooler, that threads through the 4 holes on the motherboard, again keeping it nice and flat. That went smoother than last time. So now the back plate's on, you'll notice little screw receptacles poking through, and into those we will put our stand. Liam, help me out here.
Space? I keep saying the word spaces because I don't know what any of them mean.
We're very professional on a rock, paper, shotgun. We always remember the names of things. Now, the pump onto which we are putting, well, we're putting it onto the CPU, I should say, that already has a kind of mounting plate on it. So next is in fact adding the thermal paste. Again, as with air coolers, your water cooler might come with pre-applied thermal paste on the pump, but do buy a spare tube just in case. There we go. That's more or less the right amount. And then cooler, pump oriented correctly, lining it up with the screws. Give it a nice press down first, just to spread the paste around nice and evenly, and then we can use these thumb screws to fasten it in. Now to keep it level, we're going to do it kind of diagonally. So first one goes in top corner, then bottom corner, and then we can do other top corner. That's already nice and tight, but we'll give it a quick screw with the old screwdriver just to make sure. I'll keep it nice and secure, and also possibly squidge out the last bits of thermal paste to the edges. So now that the pump's secure, there's just the matter of these rogue cables, such as this one, which is the pump power connector. This is a 3-pin connector, but you can connect this quite easily to any 4-pin slot on the motherboard, except not any 4-pin one. We want the AIO pump connector, which on this particular model is the third one across this row here. So that goes on perfectly easily. And then we also have this cable. You're not going to get this again on every model. It's just on this Thermaltake model, this connects to the fan, which again, we're not going to connect yet. We'll connect that when we have it all installed, actually in the PC case. Right, we've misplaced a screwdriver and we've forgotten what a standoff is, but the next step is so easy that even I can do it without cocking up, and it is installing the RAM. So all you have to do, assuming you have 1 or 2 RAM sticks, is flick open the slots like that, and then slide it in until you hear a very satisfying click. Just make sure that that little notch there is lined up with a little bit of plastic there, and in you go. Lovely. You do have to make sure that you're putting them into the right slots. Normally that'll be the 2nd and the 4th slot away from the CPU, but if you want, you can just double check the manual. And that is basically it.
Awesome.
Okay. Now we're going to be taking a break from the motherboard to turn our attention to the case, specifically to install the power supply. Now to get access to inside the case, we of course need to open it, which means taking off the side panels. Different cases are going to have different ways of taking off the side panels, so this is a fairly representative example. First, to get rid of this tempered glass side panel, we're just going to take off these thumb screws. 1, 2, 3. So those 4 are off, and then glass panel comes off like that. Easily done. Turn it around, and then for this metal one, there are just 2 thumb screws up at the back. Unscrew those, nice and easy, and then pull it gently off. Nice and gentle. Isn't that nice, Liam?
That was beautiful.
Now we already have all the power cables we need attached to the power supply, so it's just a case of sliding it in, essentially backwards and upside down, because you want the fan facing down, into the bay at the bottom, like so. Now we have the 4 kind of screw holes lined up with the holes on the chassis. We just take these slightly chunky screws that should come with the power supply and screw them in to fasten it in place. Now, for now we've bunged the power supply cables under this, the PSU shroud, because we want the case flat and on its side. For the next part, which is installing the motherboard. This is actually quite an interesting moment because it's the moment where your PC starts to look like a PC. So normally the first thing you do is install your motherboard's RF shield, which goes at the back where all the ports are, and you just like essentially push it in until it clicks. But our motherboard has one of these built in, so we don't actually need that. What we do need is to make sure that these little standoffs dotted around, there's 6 of those here, 7, sorry, that's not one. 8, sorry, Christ. These line up with the screw holes on the motherboard because those will be what we use to affix the motherboard to the case. Now, moment of truth. Motherboard, gently, doesn't have to be that gentle, in, making sure that the ports at the back are nice and lined up, and that the screw holes are lined up with the standoffs, which they are. Excellent. And now, simply a case of taking these little screws and one by one screwing them in to secure the motherboard to the case. Now the motherboard is in place, that's that bit there. Our next task is to kind of feed through all this massive jumble of cables from this rear hidden cable dimension through into the other side where they can connect to the motherboard. We need to do this for a bunch of different cable types, like there's this, which is the front fan, which you may have seen. These evil little things are the front panel connectors, so that's for things like the power supply and the power LED. There's this, which is connects the USB ports on the front of your PC. There's also one last one, the HD audio connector, which will be for like the mic and headphone jacks on the front of your PC. Then we also have some power supply cables. There's this monstrosity, which is the main 24 power pin connector, and this nice smaller 8-pin connector, which is mainly for the CPU. While we're here, we're also going to feed through these 2 graphics card power connectors. These obviously don't connect to the motherboard, they connect to the graphics card, but since we're in a cable tidying mood, we'll feed them through while we've got the back open here. So all these cables have in common is we want to thread them through relative to where they are on the motherboard. So this big one is kind of in the middle of the motherboard around there, so we put it through that hole. 8-pin CPU power connector, that can go through at the top there. The GPU power connectors, they can go through about in the middle there. The front panel USB connector, that can also go through about in the middle. And then on this motherboard, both the fan connectors, that's a front fan connector, and the front panel connectors are both kind of like at the bottom of the motherboard. So we'll be feeding it down there and up through a hole in the PSU shroud. That does leave this slightly L-shaped SATA power connector on the other side, but we don't need to thread that through to the main chamber, so that's fine. Just leave that there for now. Go get a coffee or something. And now, if we turn the whole thing around, we can see that it looks like shit. But don't worry, because we're about to connect everything up. So first we have the 24-pin power connector going in there. Nice and firm. So next is a slightly fiddly one. It's the 8-pin CPU power connector, and that just goes in to the top one there. You don't really need to fill in the other power connector if your motherboard has one. That's just for kind of very extreme overclocking. Next we just have the USB front panel connector that slides in there. Here at the bottom of the motherboard we have a series of miscellaneous fan headers to which we are going to connect our front fan, like so. Something we haven't talked about much yet is the rear fan, and that also needs to be connected to the motherboard. And because there's not really any 4-pin fan headers around this side or this edge of the motherboard, so what I've done is take the cable, threaded it around the back, and then back into the main chamber, where we can connect it to the just standard 4-pin header at the top there. Then we have the HD audio connector, that's from the front panel, and that tends to be at the bottom left, and just pops on like that. Finally, we have these evil little bastards, which are the front panel connectors. Now, I'm not going to lie to you, this is probably the fiddliest part of the whole build, but you are ultimately just following a diagram. So power LEDs, positive on the left, minus on the right. See, like I tell you, it's fiddly. There we go. Basically, power can kind of sit on top of reset, and then if you sandwich them together like that, you can hopefully, no, that hasn't worked, you can hopefully attach both of them at the same time. Have I done it? Do you know, I think I have.
Have you?
I have. Brilliant, we don't have to do that anymore.
He's the master. Now
that we've defeated the tiny cables, it's time to return to something we've previously neglected, which is the CPU cooler. So we already have the radiator connected to the pump, and what we have to do now is simultaneously connect the fan to the radiator, and both the fan and the radiator to the PC case. I hope that makes sense. Now there are several ways of doing this. I think the most optimal way might be to have the fan oriented as such in that it's blowing air up through the radiator and out of the case. Unfortunately, the screws I happen to have with me aren't actually long enough for that to work. So what we're going to do instead is have the radiator kind of on the bottom, then the fan, then into the case. So what that'll do is just suck away the warmth of the radiator somewhat and then blow it away outside of the case. Now I know this is not probably the optimal way of doing things, but it will work. So fan cover off, sandwich like that, making sure the holes on the fan are aligned with the holes on the radiator, and slot it up like that. And then holding it nice and steady, use the long screws to affix the whole thing to the case. And then you just have to connect the pump to the fan, connect the fan to the CPU fan header. And lastly, this particular cooler model has a SATA power connector for its RGB features, so we're going to thread that through to the back where this SATA PSU connector is, and just link those two up like a happy couple. Now it's time for the graphics card. So the first thing you need to do when you're installing a GPU is to get rid of any unnecessary in-the-way PCIe covers like this one. Do not ask me what happened to these three, it's a mystery even to me. But this one does need to go, so if we take our screwdriver, loosen that screw, the cover comes out, and the screw with it. And now we have room to insert our graphics card. What we want is these contacts here. So we want those to line up with that, which is the PCIe X16 slot. It's the highest up on the motherboard and also the fastest. So first, press the latch down to release it, line it up with the slot and also the PCIe slots at the back, and then push it in so that the latch snaps back and mostly secures it in place. To fully secure it in place, we're going to take, remember this, it's a little screw from the PCIe cover. So if we put that back into the same hole, only this time through the graphics card, that will help keep it nice and secure. I've got a spare one here, that can also go in. Tighty, tighty, tighty. And there we go. That is one nearly installed graphics card. There's just one more thing to do, which is to attach these. These are the power supply connectors. This graphics card takes two 8-pin ones. So if we just line that up and press it in, line it up, and press it in. Now that has power, that graphics card is installed. Woo! Storage. There are basically two types, SSDs and mechanical hard drives. The cool thing about SSDs is they're a lot faster, they're a lot smaller, they're a lot easier to install. Hard drives are bigger and cheaper, but that's about it. I think you can really get away with using just like a 1 terabyte, or if you've got a slightly bigger budget, a 2 terabyte SSD, and then just not worrying about mechanical hard drive as well. Or you could buy a very small SSD and then have a hard drive with just to provide extra space. I'm going to show you how to install both. So with M.2 SSDs, literally all you do, push it into the slot like that, and then fasten it out the other end. On this motherboard, there's just a little spinny clip which you rotate and secures the drive in place. A lot of motherboards also have a little tiny screw there, in which case you need a sufficiently tiny screwdriver like that to just secure it in place, but either way, dead easy. And like I said, most builds can get away with just an SSD, but if you really, really, really want a hard drive, you might as well know how to install it. So first we're going to attach a SATA data cable, that's this little L-shaped one, and the SATA power cable, which is this big L-shaped one, and that's the one that attaches to the power supply. Now this case will make things really easy for us because it has a quick release tray. Now hopefully this will just kind of clip in without destroying the drive or any of our fingers, and then we can just slide it back in. There, isn't that cute? We are, however, not quite done because we just need to connect the other end of the SATA cable to the SATA port on the motherboard. And that's reasonably easy done. We've just threaded it through to the main chamber and plugged it into a SATA port. Now that our PC is all storaged up, it is essentially a working PC. You can turn it on, it will do things. However, there is still the small issue of this, the jumble of cables around the back. So in this section, we're going to show you how to tidy those cables and also slide the side panels back on so you can actually start using it. Now, a lot of cable tidying is literally just shoving loose cables into the empty spaces at the bottom of your PC, like that and like that. But we also want to make use of cable routing holes, like we have there and up there and up there, for instance, and the cable routing channels. Now, on some high-end PCs, these will be actually like little plastic channels with, if you're very lucky, Velcro straps. However, on this more basic one, we've just got these little loops through which we will loop this, the cable tie. So let's start with this CPU power connector on the left, which in this case is actually two power cables. So if we keep those nice and close to the loop under there, thread the cable tie through there, and then do the little hole, tie the whole thing to the case, nice and neat like that, snip off the excess. Boom. If you have a bunch of random cables just lying around not really doing anything, you don't have to connect them straight to the case. If you want, you can just take a cable tie and neaten them up a bit like that. Although, looking down here, we do have a nice, juicy, unused hook. So let's loop through a bigger cable tie. Helps, once again, if you're more dexterous than I am. And there. Tie that down nice and tight. Now this cable that's attached to our cooler is a bit unnecessarily long, so what we're going to do is fold that up. It just takes up less space. And then yet another loop, yet another cable tie. 1, 2, 3. Said 1, 2, 3, you stupid cable tie, go in. That's video producer Liam laughing at my misfortune, but that is done. I imagine this probably isn't the most interesting part of the video to watch, so why don't we just have Liam cut to a nice shot of the PC after I finish doing the cable tidying. Yep, that'll do. Now that's all that's left to do is slide the first of the two side panels on, tighten it with a screw at the back, and then the glass panel goes back on the other side with the same screws. Okay, so congratulations, you have built a gaming PC, but only in the physical sense, because we still need to install Windows. Now there are a couple of ways of doing this. You can get a Windows installation USB from Microsoft, or you can download the Windows ISO and apply it to a USB stick that you own yourself. That's what we've done, and that just goes in the back of the PC like any USB stick would, except you're installing Windows from it. So, the first thing that you need to do when you turn on your PC is to make sure that you are booting from the USB with Windows 10 on it. To do that, you will need to go into the BIOS, which you can do by pressing either F2 or the delete key or F12 on your keyboard, basically as soon as the PC starts up. And you'll see a screen that looks either identical to or more or less the same as this. So we want to go into advanced mode, which on this motherboard is done by pressing F7, going to the boot menu, and just checking that the first boot option is in fact the flash drive on which we have Windows 10. We do, so that's okay. So you can press escape, exit, we don't need to save anything, and then the PC should reboot, booting from the Windows 10 USB. So now we've booted from the Windows USB, we're in the kind of like Windows setup mode. So we'll just select our languages, that's all right, because we pronounce aluminium with an I, and then there's a nice big Install Now button. Click that. So if you have a Windows activation key ready, you can punch it in here, but if you don't, that's fine. We can just click I don't have a product key here and continue the installation. So here's a list of all the different Windows versions you can install. We just want Windows Home, so we'll select that, that's already done. Click Next. Now, if you are the fastidious sort, you will want to read the Microsoft license terms. There is quite a lot of it. Once you're done, click I accept at the bottom there, and then Next. Right, on this screen here, we want to click Install Windows. Now, this screen is where we choose the storage drive onto which we are installing Windows. We want to do it on the SSD rather than the slow mechanical hard drive, which in this case is drive 0. So we select that and click Next. And here we go. Thus begins a rather long and dull installations period. This will restart your PC maybe a couple of times, I think. So why don't we go and break for lunch, Liam?
Yes.
Sometime later, we arrive in Windows Setup proper. This is for Windows 11, but it'll look similar for Windows 10. Click Yes for the region. Yes, that's the right keyboard layout. No, we don't want to add a second. Select a network to connect to. So after a lot more loading, you'll reach this, the Name Your Device page. You don't have to do this if you want, you can just click Skip for now. But let's name ours Riggy. The RPS rig. Another bit of loading later, we reach the Let's Add Your Microsoft Account page. Now, you don't strictly have to, you do have other sign-in options, but if you sign in with a Microsoft account, it will apply your Windows activation key to that account, which means you can install it on other systems in the future. So I'm going to type in my Microsoft account email, hoping Liam keeps his word and blurs it out for me. And I'd especially hope he blurs out my password. What is my password? You'll also need to create a PIN, so let's do that. After this spinny thing stops. There we go. Once again, Liam, blur this out or I'm coming for you. Now it's time to decide whether you want Microsoft to have a load of permissions. We're going to select No, and Accept, and No, and Accept. Required Only, and Accept, No, and Accept, No, and Accept. And this time, No, and Accept. This, I'm going to be honest with you, I can't even remember what this is. It's basically a load of tracking gubbins that if you want more personalized stuff, you can click. I don't think we need to bother with that, so I think we're just going to skip. Again, if you have OneDrive, you can add that as a backup option here. We're going to click Only Save Files to this PC. And at long last, there you have it. The fruit of your labors. The Windows desktop is finally ready, and you can go about installing all your games and applications and what have you. You have built a PC. Or have you? There is just one small step left to take if you have a secondary drive like a hard disk, and that's to open Disk Management. Just open the Start menu, type in Disk Management, it will pop up, and that's to initialize our spare disk. So if you right click on this black unallocated section here, click New Simple Volume, Click next. That's all fine, you can leave that. Next, assign a drive letter. We'll say it's E. That's all fine. Format as NTFS, that's all fine. Volume label, call this whatever you like. We'll call it HDD without typos. Click next, finish, and there you have it. Both drives are fully working. Your PC is complete. Graham is doing a celebratory little dance.
Graham?
Fuck. And that's it. You have built a PC. It is done. It is finished. You can play games on it. So there's nothing really more for me to say, except thank you very much for watching. Liam has told me to say, for all your PC gaming needs, please be sure to check out rockpapershotgun.com. And with that, I'll bid you good day. Cheers.